room already. My name is Gana Gantuga, and I will be the moderator for today's session on engaging the private sector on anticipatory action. I work at the IFRC, International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, as an anticipatory action coordinator. So before we start with the agenda, a quick housekeeping reminder. I'm sure most of you have been in this virtual world for the last 2 years, so you know a lot about the housekeeping. However, please make sure that your microphone is muted and make sure that it's turned on when you speak. Throughout the session, please feel free to use the chat box to ask the questions from our distinguished speakers today. And we will have some time allocated to address some of your questions. So feel free to use it as you see fit. And so we are gathered today to discuss about a very exciting topic. We're going to discuss about the private sector engagement in anticipatory action together with the Connecting Business Initiative, or CBI. Most of you probably know about this initiative. It engages the local private sector before, during, and after emergencies. It is jointly led by the UNDP and OCHA with strategic partners like the IFRC, with the 192 local Red Cross and Red Crescent societies around the world, with 14 million volunteers on the ground. CBI and IFRC have identified anticipatory action as a priority area for collaboration. We aim, first of all, to expand opportunities for the private sector to engage and support anticipatory action frameworks, as well as implementation on the ground. 2, to recognize the role that private sector, especially the small and medium enterprises, can have in community preparedness, response, and resilience. So that being said, we would like to know more about you and which organization you work for, and what is your motivation for joining today's meeting today. We will do that through the Mentimeter. I will share the link with you on the chat, as well as the codes. So you just have to enter through this link, or you can also go menti.com, and you can add these codes in there where it's requested. Okay. Let me know if you have any problems of doing that. Okay, we already see some results. We have 3 people, 4 people. We have some private sector personnel, a lot of the UN representation there, some Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, and other local agencies. Interesting, so 6. We have 48 participants, so let's give it another minute. Others. Would be interesting to know where the others is. Please feel free to put it in the chat also. Great. More responses are coming in. Great. Okay, let us move to our next question. So it will be around the motivation of attending this session today. Oh, yay. So I see we have also a representation from government. That's great. So it is very inclusive. We have people from the private sector, UN, majority, Red Cross, Red Crescent, and other local agencies, government, and some other organizations. So we will move to our next question. Please write in what motivated you to join the session. It is an open-ended question. You can just type in a sentence, a phrase. I want to learn about how the private sector can engage. Excellent. We'll definitely talk about how anticipatory action is an inclusive process, and we want to make sure that anticipatory action is co-designed. Therefore, private sector is an important stakeholder in this discussion. Hearing insights from the private sector, most definitely, we have some representation from the private sector. To learn more about the range of private sector organizations interested in this topic, definitely. Best practices for emergency, very interesting. We'll talk about what is the normal traditional way of responding, and also what is the added value of anticipatory action, what's different. To gain more knowledge and up-to-date approach, most important. Yeah, for sure. So we are talking about also gaps and opportunities for small and medium scale enterprises. We'll hear from feedback, surveys. Wow, great feedback. To create disaster response, CSR projects. Explore how we can work together for maximum impact. Couldn't agree more. We have Anticipation Hub, a huge network on anticipatory action. Okay, thank you so much. It's great to hear your motivation. I hear and I see that now everyone is interested in this topic, and you're very motivated for this exercise and for this meeting. So feel free to add all your questions, and without further ado, let me introduce you to our amazing speakers and panelists today. We have Kara Sihan, who's here on our screen. She's the head of the Anticipation Hub, the initiative which brings together 92 stakeholders, partners across academia, policy, and practitioners. We have Gilbert Tampos. Maybe Gilbert, if you could turn on your camera. She is the forecast-based financing national project coordinator at the Philippine Red Cross. Philippine Red Cross is our forefront champions on anticipatory action, so we're very lucky that we could get somebody from the National Society. We have our distinguished panelist, Nadia Vidic, head of the OCHA Philippines. She has a decade of experiences within the UN and the strategic planning, partnership, climate change issues, and she's been head of the OCHA Philippines since 2021. We have next our distinguished panelist, Ana Caterina Aspuria, or Trina. Thank you very much for joining. She's the head of the development programs and innovation at Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation. So we have a stakeholder from the private sector also. So these are our amazing panelists for today. And I also want to acknowledge and make sure that Tina, Nada, and other stakeholders who's been supporting this session. So let's get into the depth of our session today. And my first question is to Kara. I would like to know, and for the audience to set the scene, to let us know what is anticipatory action and how is that different to do the way we do disaster response. Thank you.
Thank you, Ghana. Thank you to CBI and IFRC for letting me join this session. So if you are attending HNPW and or part of or working with the humanitarian sector, you would know that the requirement for humanitarian assistance is only increasing while resources remain scarce. While we are responding to this crisis, we as the humanitarian community must also do it in a smarter way. In order to step up to these challenges, we also need to be ambitious and work in partnership. As the head of the Anticipation App, I'm really encouraged to see HNPW this year. I have been participating in organizing sessions on anticipatory action since 2017. I am encouraged to see such a high attention this year on anticipatory action. We have about 20 sessions, if I'm not mistaken, dedicated to the topic, organized by various organizations, from discussing predictive analytics to financing, from conflict to drought, and here we are with the private sector. Can you show me the slides, please? So what do we know about traditional emergency response? Let's first acknowledge that traditional emergency response saves lives. It is comprehensive and effective. We have learned and improved the way we do business over the past decades, but it is also reactive. We act when impact is already felt, and by then we are in the race to save lives while having to make quick and often protected decisions. Yet today, we can predict with growing confidence the humanitarian impacts of certain climatic shocks or communicable disease. In these cases, neither the shock nor the way we handle a crisis, or the way of crisis will unfold, should come as a surprise to us. So, next slide, please. If we knew a heat wave is likely to happen, why aren't we assuring that the neighbors check up on their elderly and that they are living in cool enough spaces? If we knew a big flood was coming, why are we waiting to rescue people by boat instead of giving people the means to get out of the way? Next slides, please. So what does anticipatory action do? How does it change the way we do business? By using data, predictions, and forecasts, we can anticipate humanitarian needs and think through actions to mitigate or prevent suffering before a crisis spirals out of control. So you can see here, by using forecasts or predictive analytics for certain hazards, we are now looking mostly at hydrometeorological hazards, but more work is in progress, for example, for disease outbreaks and applying anticipatory action for weather events in conflict situations, for example. We also are, as different organizations, using pre-agreed plans and pre-agreed financing to basically make up this anticipatory action. By doing so, we can act ahead of a hazard impact and therefore reducing that impact through acting on early warning signs. So next slide, please. I will not talk through specific examples because we will be hearing about those today, but as you can see, there are now many anticipatory action that is being done by the humanitarian actors. So I'm here on behalf of the Anticipation Hub. As Gana mentioned, the Anticipation Hub is consisting of the Red Cross movement, the UN, NGOs, and other agencies, government, academia. And we have collected different types of experiences on anticipatory action. So anticipatory action means basically acting ahead of cold wave, for example, but assuring livestock are protected and they have feeders and also the medicines to withstand the cold. Or as you will see, you have heard also from Bangladesh, delivering cash assistance using 10-day forecast and 5-day forecast ahead of the flood peak. And we will hear more about the experiences from our colleagues in the Philippines today. Next slides, please. Just to say again, it is a growing movement. You can see here, based on the World Disaster Report of IFRC published in 2020, at the time there were 60 countries where the UN, Red Cross, and NGOs are implementing, and we are seeing many more. I think right now the number is reaching over 70 altogether. And this is very much enabled by, of course, the humanitarian actors, but also scientists, academia, forecasters, and the scientific community. And we also acknowledge that we cannot do it alone as a humanitarian sector. If we want to scale up, we need partnership. We need also to work better with the climate and development actors. And certainly there's so much opportunity to work with the private sectors. That's why I'm excited to hear, hopefully from our private sector colleagues, the insights on how we could work together. The next slide, please. So what have we learned? I will not go again into the details. I put there on the slides types of cost benefit that we have learned in various countries based on the experiences of the Red Cross and the UN. But we have learned in essence that anticipatory action is a faster way of delivering humanitarian assistance. It is more efficient. It is also more dignified. We give people the choice ahead of the impact. that they potentially could feel. It reduces losses and severe suffering before they occur, and it protects development gains. It also increases the impact of available funds. This is what we are learning today. And very happy again to be joined by my colleagues from the Philippines Red Cross and the German Red Cross of the Philippines, who will be able to share their experience today. Over to you, Gana.
Thank you very much, Kara. It's exciting to know what is anticipatory action, and I hope it was very interesting for the audience too. Now let's zoom into more country-specific example where there is already engagement of private sector in anticipatory action. So the example of Philippines is one of the only ones, if not the only one, of the anticipatory action pilots that includes the private sector. Before we hear from Gilbert, let us show you a video which demonstrates this engagement. Nara, if you could help us to go to the video, thank you.
And we have the disaster.
Can be part na i-detail out po.
So this area, we hindi kami nag-choose niyan. Tumulong si Barco.
siguro kung nagkalabi din ako. Dako siya nga gamit kay sa evacuation center pohon, mamabot siguro na may tabo. So dako na siya nga gamit para sa mga evacuees, kay aron ang evacuees di na maglatagaw kung naa sila kinahanglanon nga wala sa nila. So paggawas pa lang nila sa ilang pwesto sa evacuation center, makita na nila nagkalain-lain tindahan nga diin nagkalain-lain mo ng mga produkto nga pwede nila mapanan. So yung sakto rin gihapon yung presyo.
Kalamidad po sir na naingan ito, mabot. Dali na po ng pagkagat pagpalit nila, ay naraman around sa evacuation kung sila kinahanglan.
The beneficiaries are very happy seeing not just the community who support them, but also the leaders, which is very important.
On behalf of my barangay officials and barangay workers, no, maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. Sir.
Great, thank you very much. That was very inspiring, and to learn more about the anticipatory action on the ground in Philippines. So Gilbert, let us know, and what was this enabling environment to engage the anticipatory action, to engage the private sector in the anticipatory action? How did that happen?
So good morning and good afternoon and good evening for some areas here. So my name is Gilbert again. So for the in the country, in the Philippines, LGUs and communities are very proactive in this kind of early action protocols that what we had, because they consider this as one of the innovative approach of the PRC, particularly in supporting those community that is being affected during flooding season. So it also promotes community resiliency to those community that has been always being affected or frequently hit by typhoon and also by flooding. So they are very receptive into the early action protocols that what we had, and also some local government units are starting to adopt the forecast-based financing into their local DRRM fund, wherein they allocated fund to support the early action protocols that what we had implemented into their localities. The simulation, the highlight of the simulation or the purpose of the simulation exercise that what we did for the community is to enlighten up their spirit and also to motivate them, for them to be able to joining us to do anticipatory actions, like and also is to gather more informations, datas, and also evidence that what might be helping us to implement this kind of early action protocols. Actually, we are also tapping the local government unit on the national level also, because PRC is part of the national level, wherein they open or they create this memorandum number 60. If you have heard this memorandum number 60, it is a creation of a window period for FDF for the activation phase. So instead of utilization of fund while declaring of state of calamity, they could now declare a state of imminent disaster for them to be able to utilize their calamity fund. So it is a really great opportunity for us and also for the other anticipatory actors having this kind of early actions into the community that we're focusing to.
Thank you, Gilbert. My next question is to Manya. OCHA has designed anticipatory action pilot in the Philippines. Could you explain how is it designed and what is the role of private sector?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ghana. So first of all, I'm extremely grateful to be part of this esteemed panel and to share the lessons learned we have from the Philippines in such a forum. And I mean, especially doing this together with Gilbert and Trina, whom we work closely here in the Philippines. So I'll give you a perspective of someone who's a humanitarian practitioner. Anticipatory action practitioner from the field. I'm very grateful for Kara giving us the kind of overall perspective of anticipatory action is. So indeed, if we can go to the first slide. So the Central Emergency Relief Fund, which is managed by OCHA on behalf of the humanitarian system, allocated for this typhoon season and the previous typhoon season, an amount that gives us opportunity to pilot anticipatory action for tropical storms at scale. And this is the first such pilot. I mean, there has been a lot of pilots for anticipatory action that have been fairly small scale, looking at a few hundred households. But what is interesting is this is a kind of bold innovation, a bold experiment, looking at it at scale. So if it's triggered, it would target 270,000 beneficiaries, so almost 250 million of people. I mean, as you've seen also probably, why the Philippines? It's always at the forefront of such experiments. We do experience 20 plus tropical storms per year, 5 of those usually destructive. So in many ways, it's a good candidate, of course, in addition to the enabling environment from the government and from a number of partners who are here. So this model is implemented with the 5 UN agencies and OCHA as a coordinator, so FAO, IOM, UNFPA, UNICEF, and WFP. And of course, it's important also to recognize the contributions of strategic partners, both Philippine Red Cross, but also IFRC globally and START Network, which brings together INGOs. So the model is focusing on region 5 and 8. But for this year, for this typhoon season, we are looking at expanding geographically to other areas. And the model would be triggered if a significant typhoon of category 4 or 5 makes landfall. And this, it would be triggered 3 days before landfall. So needless to say that it's based on a no regrets approach. And it is fairly difficult to predict typhoons in the Philippines. For the Typhoon Ray activation, we had a near active that hit in December 2021. We had a near activation, which means the teams were pre-deployed, but then in the 3 days before landfall, the triggers were not reached because the typhoon did not have the necessary strength. It only intensified in the last 12 hours. So we witnessed this rapid intensification when it intensified from category 2 to category 5. And so we immediately then shifted to the traditional humanitarian response. So I think it's also important to recognize how the 2 approaches work hand in hand. And I think the next slide would talk more about the partnerships and the importance of the private sector. So partnership was one of the key principles of how the pilot was designed. We also said that 30% of the SURF funding out of the $7.5 million allocated. So perhaps if we can go on the next slide. 30% needs to go to local actors. So this is, as you see on the slide, this is our coalition of the willing and the able, and PDRF, just as any other partner, they're also part of this coalition. I think 2 things to emphasize here is that this is a learning pilot. I think we all are extremely humble by the whole experience and trying to forecast and anticipate weather here in the Philippines. But I think it's precisely because of that, it's also a need to consider the wealth of experience and existing capacities and good practices. And of course, from that perspective, working with PDRF makes sense. What was also important for us that as we design this pilot and as those partners carry out each of them their individual interventions, that this pilot is a cost-effective pilot. It's the cost-effectiveness of the model. And for us, it's essential that the investment goes to the Filipino people as well as to the international community that, of course, is learning from this. So I think including the private sector and their know-how and capabilities and working with PDRF for us was kind of clear from the beginning. I'll stop here and perhaps add on later. Thank you.
Thank you, Manya. Also highlighting how the complexities of the anticipatory action, about the triggers, no-regret approach, and also highlighting the fact that we need to work with the existing capacities on the ground. So next, I would like to pass the floor to Trina. Now we have heard about anticipatory action from humanitarian actors mainly, and now from the private sector perspective, what is the motivation in getting engaged in anticipatory action?
Thanks, Gana. So before I start, I just want to say a few words about PDRF because I see that we have a lot of people coming in from different parts of the world. We are the country's major private sector coordinator for disaster management, and we are a network of 100 private sector companies, mostly from top conglomerates as well. And lastly, we also sit as a representative of the private sector in the UN humanitarian country team. So there. Going back to the question on what is our motivation, I think it still fits in the adage that for every dollar you invest in preparedness and now in AA, would benefit to saving up quadruple of its value in losses. And in the bottom or top to bottom visualization, we would see that the businesses would be impacted and it will trickle down to its employees, to their families, up to the individuals. So at least in the context of the Philippines, where 80% of the workforce is vulnerable, we will see that there will be a domino effect either way. And another one would be looking at the meaningful shift towards anticipating disasters or its impacts is not possible without investment, also to the factors that enable it. So for example, weather forecast, impact-based forecasting, predictive analytics, and early warning systems are vital to the ability for us to identify the triggers within the window between the forecast and the impact. And just to go backtrack a bit, in 2018, PDRF launched the first national private sector run emergency operations center with that intention to serve with that concept also, even before the private sector anticipatory concept was born. So central to a lot of our interventions now are really born out of the center. Now, diving to the pilot program was a cash assistance to farmers affected by Typhoon Goni. So this was in partnership with FAO, and it's still a developing project, as mentioned earlier by Manya. We had an opportunity to trigger it last time, but it didn't pursue. So this is now something that we are still co-developing with FAO. But in the initial stage of the pilot is a joint program or joint work plan for a cash distribution project whenever there will be a trigger for the activation. This is in partnership with a telco company and a local digital bank. We did unlock a few challenges for this in terms of how savvy with technology the beneficiaries will be, and at the same time, the modality of how it's going to be delivered. At first, the program was designed that money can be transferred directly or digitally to the beneficiary and either withdraw it via cash or just pay with a QR. The target area for us was Catanduanes. It's an island province, and at the time, we had limitations in terms of connectivity. And some also of the most vulnerable that are always affected doesn't own a smartphone. So that's a challenge. So then we modified the approach. And the first one would be the most common one, is just on cash distribution. And the other one is through vouchers. So the vouchers now, which we see as an effective mechanism for AA, are designed to be under pre-agreements with local stores, such as hardware, supermarkets. So they have the ability to procure items based on what they need and what is available. So I think that already touches base on the dignified approach to AA. However, the information on AA is or has limited benefits unless it's understandable at a local level. So moving forward, our actions have been focused on democratizing that information and to benefit and provide capacity to the selected beneficiaries. So recently, or a few months ago, we also co-developed and piloted a farm field school that covers understanding DRRCCA, alternative livelihood, access to finance, insurance, and business continuity. So generally, the 6-month program is to help them understand the risks and understand early warnings and the actions that they need to do in case of future shocks. So that's the pilot, which is also ongoing. But on the side, just to also share that we also launched a 5-year climate resilient cities project with USAID and CRS, where the primary role of the private sector is to enhance the capacity of the local governments in updating their DRRCCA plans. So unique to what we bring as a private sector, aside from climate finance, is insurance and other financial modalities and innovations that could be tapped and incorporated in their plans, so that their preparedness and response would already include a semblance of AA. So I think I'm oversharing at this point, but I hope that gives a preview of what the private sector is doing or can do. So back to you, Gana.
Thank you, Trina. Very interesting to bring this democratizing the approach. It was very exciting to hear from you. Now, we would like to go back to Gilbert. We have heard that the Philippines Red Cross conducted the feedback, the survey from the small, medium enterprises. What were the findings? Please tell us.
Can we have the slide presentation?
I think that's not the right slide.
Thank you. So the Philippine Red Cross has this feedback in how this early action being started in the country. So as we all know, it is came up with a focus group discussion series of activities being conducted by the Philippine Red Cross together with our partners, stakeholders, and also other sectors that has a big great involvement onto these early actions. Like for example, on the DTI or the Department Trade of Industries, they are the one who initiated initiative that we must involve the private sectors and also the small micro business enterprises. In terms of the micro business enterprises, small micro business enterprises, they are according to DTI is called sort of marginalized during flooding season or during typhoon season. So they are being requested to be part and conduct some PRC has been requested to conduct series of capacity building and also survey to those highly vulnerable household in terms of small micro business enterprises. So next slide. Well, for the flood early action protocol, temporary relocation of vulnerable businesses has been identified. So also we have two actions being identified. One is the relocation of the small micro business enterprises and to the fixed market, identified fixed market, and then the other one is the rolling store. Next slide, please. So this is the step and procedures implementing the implementation process. For peacetime, we have 1 to up to 4. So this is the process we did during peacetime. So meaning we had this ample time to do the validation, market assessment, beneficiary selection, selection of the BARCOM or the barangay committee, and then the orientation for the PRC principles and orientation with the volunteers. The goodness of this kind of in this step 1 during the implementation process is we had this ample time to do the market assessment and the criteria selection of the beneficiaries that we are going to target with. So in terms of validation and validation of our target beneficiaries, the BARCOM is playing a vital role in terms of validation and verifying our target beneficiaries, because BARCOM is the barangay committee. They are the one. It is a multi-sectoral group into the locality, which is they are the one who being they are the one who choose the target beneficiary. They are the one who selected the beneficiary based on the criteria selected, and then the orientation of volunteers with our BARCO member also doing during peacetime. The identification of temporary shelter or temporary marketplace and the vehicle rental service provider being done during peacetime also, and then the identification of safe route during the activation, and then the establish of relocation team. So this relocation team is a core group of volunteers aside from the BARCOM or barangay committee. This is what we call the barangay barangay volunteers. They are the one who is assigned or tasked to support those to support those SMEs during the evacuation time. So they are the one who make supporting the lifting or transport of the assets of the small micro business enterprises beneficiaries. Then during when the trigger was reached or has been reached, we will be able to purchase table and tents for the temporary market, wherein it will be put up a mini marketplace onto the identified area. This area is really a sort of a high ground for them to be able to not to be flooded, and also supporting the community to or the small micro business enterprises in terms of selling out their product immediately to avoid to avoid the damage into their collaterals, or to lessen to avoid the impact in terms of damage into their incomes. So number 6 is we have to hire 5 to 10 workers to the marketplace to support the evacuation area for the marketplace. And then temporary market and then mobile market was being also conducted. So this mobile market, they were the one being identified as rolling store, wherein they will be able to roam around into the community with the safe identified route for them to be able to sell out their market or merchandises. Our target or priority item to be sold or to sold on this marketplace or are those perishable goods. It is much more the top priority for this one. And then on the number 7, after impact, after completing the evacuation, LG will take over and then respond for the responsibility and return to the asset business owners after the flood has subsided. Next slide, ma'am. So market assessment in Butuan City, this is the activity we conducted for us to be able to gather the information and up to the simulation exercises. So core group in Agusan del Norte was conducted. It is a half-day activity last September 11, 2020. We invited, since it is a core group, we invited multi-sectoral. We also involve private sectors, DTI, provincial government units, offices, and also Department of Agriculture. So this will be the key actors playing the vital roles on how we will be able to do the market survey into their localities. Key informants interview or KII, we conducted series of focus group discussion and interview through ODK. To identify our target beneficiaries, training and data collection on the mapping. So we map out all those target beneficiaries, and also the data collected has been transferred for security of the data. And then field data collection. So we conducted open data kit survey into our localities, and then it was being transmitted directly to our server, and then it would be pre-identified who will go into targeted with based on the criteria selection. And then processing of collection data. After that is the prioritization of vulnerable market. Next slide po. So for the simulations lessons learned, we had this strengthened and then the weaknesses. For the strength, involvement of beneficiaries, trade unions, and umbrellas, institutions like chambers of commerce or DTIs and other sectors are really great, are really appreciated and on this aspect, because they are the one who support in terms of identification of our partners to support in terms of transportations, provision of tents, provision of anything that could support into our marketplace or identified fixed market. Still coordination with government at all levels and every stage for the better engagement. Beneficiary are empowered, trained, and self-driven. SMEs and markets are easily to target. It's a larger group in the small area. So that's our strength. And then the weaknesses we had is keeping the beneficiary list up to date as it was being mobilized. So our target is to have this validation, yearly validation of our target beneficiary. As we all know, some of them as moving around into their localities, into their places, or some of them has migrated to other provinces. So we need to validate that one. And then private sector has a busy lifestyle in completing demands. Entrepreneurs might have more options in resources to cope with the events. Example is microfinances. Building relationship with private sectors takes longer time because, as we all know, with their busy schedules, we having a hard time to talk with them, to support in terms of, like for example, is to support in terms of our DRR activities. Next slide, ma'am. Thank you. For the opportunity, why we involve the academe and private sector, civil society, and private sector, is for us to be able to get the effectiveness and risk sharing of efficiency sustainability. So as we all know that having this kind of project or early action protocols, that what we wanted is to have this sense of ownership into their localities, having this sense of ownership into their provinces, into their localities, that might somehow involve them into or boost their morality, something like that, to have this kind of support in terms of early action protocol. So somehow it will help them in supporting into their activities, daily life activities, and promoting community resilience. So how we able to agree to conduct agreement with the private and public partnership with associations, especially in effective communication, programmatic beneficiaries, and technical expertise, livelihood better and quicker reach by transfer of knowledge from private sectors to practitioners, and then mobilization of fund to avoid breakage of supplies of food chain and nutrition. That is why we are doing also the rolling store for us to be able to support the SMEs to do their to sell their items, and also promoting the safety of our community. Social responsibility to reduce the impact of climate change, resilience of their supply chains. Next slide po.
Thank you. Thank you, Gilbert.
Thank you,
I think we
ma'am.
can wrap up here. Very detailed conversation around what are the steps in anticipatory action and where we can engage private sector. So thank you for your insights. I think you already started talking about what were some of the challenges and lessons learned in engaging with the private sector. So I would like to ask Manya also to add on to that. Is there anything that you would like to highlight in terms of those challenges, and how did you mitigate them?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Gana. And I'll just build on some of the points that Gilbert already raised, not to repeat too much. So I think we work with PDRF as a partner on an equal footing. So as we are embarking on this process to, in a way, rethink the humanitarian paradigm, and how we are responding to disasters here in the Philippines. So we also wanted to have, so to say, the best and brightest in the room to do that. And it was in a way easy to also invite the private sector, and with the know-how and resources they can contribute. I think it's also an exciting opportunity because we are designing the new way of responding to disasters from scratch. So we have a blank canvas. That doesn't happen often, if ever, in a career on any practitioner. So it's a very rare opportunity. I think we are very glad we can get a chance to explore it with the private sector. And we are also thinking through some innovative approaches like market-based approaches, microfinancing, all those solutions that have difficulties finding time in a traditional humanitarian response. It might take ages to bring it in there. So I think, as you build a new way of responding, it's easier to innovate from non-technological innovation, but on the process innovation. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, it's coordination. And because of coordination of efforts, PDRF is also a member of the humanitarian country team here in the Philippines. And we are kind of running this project, the Anticipatory Action from SURF, under the umbrella of the humanitarian country team. And so we kind of want to make sure that whoever is a member of this group is also part of the efforts of the new way of responding. And I think, in terms of the lessons learned or the challenges, I think the difficulties were like to just grasp the concept. If someone has been responding to natural disasters for 20 plus decades, and you kind of know what works and has been proven in the battlefield and big battlefields as well, it's sometimes difficult to start responding differently. So I think that's kind of on one hand side. I think also in terms of grasping the concept is to truly understand what are preparedness activities and what is anticipatory action. Like Gilbert was talking about peace times, this is in a way preparedness, and then or preparedness for anticipatory action. When is anticipatory action? So I think, kind of practical way of understanding what the concept is when you're outside of the room or when it's kind of clear what it is. Of course, capacity issues, because there are so many other priorities, and lack of complementary funding for such pilots, particularly for the preparedness activities or for the peacetime activities. For sure, more work is needed. And I think we're just at the beginning, and there for sure will be a lot of opportunities to engage with the private sector moving forward. Thank you.
Many thanks, Manya. Couldn't agree with you more. Definitely resonates all of those challenges, and also thank you for highlighting the opportunities. And I also think that it's a good segue to my next question to Kara. How do we build these bridges, and how do we make sure we involve the private sector more?
Thanks, Gana, and really encouraging to hear from everyone the call for more collaboration, partnership, and collectively working together. I think the first call from our side is that we have a lot of resources, and I'm not talking Anticipation Hub as an initiative, but really collecting the knowledge and expertise from all our partners, users, and the Anticipatory Action community. So we are facilitating learning, guidance, exchange, and advocacy on anticipatory action. So if you haven't visited our website, please do so. There's a lot of resources. So how have the private sector community been engaged with anticipatory action? What we know is private sectors are funding some of the anticipatory action programs. Private sector, for example, insurance companies are actually supporting humanitarian actors to develop financial products through parametric triggers. And of course, we see real examples today in this session of how private sector SME are actually involved in the planning, and that's also what we want to see more and more. Just in a very quickly, we have the linking risk financing with anticipatory action working group as part of our exchange format. But again, this is very much limited to insurance and those who are working specifically on risk financing. But we are also keen to hear from our private sector colleagues what is actually needed, what kind of exchange would be required to advance kind of the learning between humanitarian actors and the private sector. So if you have any ideas on how you want to contribute, how we can potentially set up or support such working group, please do get in touch with us. We would like to hear from you. And thanks again for the organizers for inviting me. It's been a pleasure. Over to you, Gana.
Thanks, Kara. I think we're already getting into the next steps, but my final question actually to Trina. As a private sector, did we convince you? And after today's session, how would you convince others from the private sector to engage more in anticipatory action, to co-design anticipatory action frameworks and implementations?
Thanks, Gana, and thanks to everyone for those inputs. And also to build up on that, I think more than the advice would be a recommendation based from the conversation. And it comes in two parts. So knowing that the Philippines is already part or is part of the supermarket of disasters, the first thing we have to look is the sustainability and ownership of AA in the long run. So who owns it? Who will run it um, in the long run? And that is by encouraging more sectors to participate. And this is also one thing also that the private sector can take on, considering its market reach or its connection to people. Uh, the private sector can be a conduit to either amplifying the information to reach a wider area, most especially to areas mostly not reached by government aid or by traditional humanitarians. Um, so aside from that, and I think the enabling financing component of AA, others that can be done and it already been mentioned is on innovation, both on the tech side and on the process side. So for example, telco companies, microfinancing companies can develop cash transfer modalities that are practical and doable. Because I think it's not a one size fits all in terms of finance. So there should be some flexibility, and the expertise of the private sector can be used or harnessed to develop that. Also having pre-agreements with the private sector can support AA in the long run. So for example, in what I've mentioned earlier, having that agreement with supermarkets or hardware stores limits the challenge of delivering aid, because you can already trigger it, you can already provide it, but sourcing it out, it would require support from the private sector. Um, and others would be on communication and advocacy, which is always standard, and also on knowledge management and training. The second part of my recommendation, so the private sector can actively engage in AA, is to amplify, again, what has been mentioned, is to call for the traditional humanitarian actors to open up doors for the private sector, encouraging the uptake of localization, especially if it's triggered by international efforts. Um, and then encouraging also partnerships, not only for the funding capacity, but also on the collective learning. This is specific to the language that has been used. I think I've used it earlier. We need to democratize the information so more people can understand it and we can operationalize it. Because the more highfalutin the word is, the more it becomes intimidating for people to engage with. So I think also the language in it plays a role. Um, so for the private sector, I think those are the key areas or key entry points where they can engage in, and definitely with the support of the traditional humanitarian actors, we can operationalize and move forward in doing collaborative work in this space. Over.
Thank you so much, Ana Katrina. So we are almost at the end of the session. It was excellent speeches from the speakers. Definitely, I think the few takeaways that there is huge mindset changes needed in terms of moving from reactive to anticipatory approaches and to the response financing. Manya, you mentioned definitely we need to tap into different resources. Thank you for mentioning, Anna, in terms of the flexibility and innovation on the process. So I'm sure you are at different time zones, but if you're in Europe, you'll probably be having lunch. And we would just like to finalize the session with another Mentimeter with an open-ended question. Maybe you can just do it in your free time. It's about a scenario. So you're having lunch with your colleague and you would like to pitch this idea, how to better involve private sector in anticipatory action. What would be your pitch phrase or a sentence? So you can again enter to the Mentimeter through this link, and you can do it just after the session. And thank you so much for joining today, and it was a pleasure meeting you all. Please feel free to reach out. Definitely the recording will be available. And yeah, let's continue this collaboration and discussion on anticipatory action. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.